Guys, and I hope you rock.
Cool, thanks. So thank you all for coming. Hope you all got some coffee. And I kind of already said it. I'm talking today about design. And I know I have a lot of developers probably in the audience. How many people are designers? Oh, okay, cool. The developers, probably the rest of you guys. Yeah, all right. So I'm actually a developer too, but I appreciate that you have all come to learn a little bit about design, and kudos to Polydia for including this in a conference. I actually have had the good fortune of both speaking at design conferences and speaking at development conferences about sort of the integration of the two, and it's really an important thing. How many of you have ever developed software that either never sees the light of day or never really sees any use by real end users? Yeah, it sucks, right? So, I mean, you spend 40 hours of your week, you really want to create something that's powerful in this world. And really, our best opportunity to do that is in working with designers and in working with our end customer and the product people to figure out what can we build that is actually going to be a lot of value. The other thing I'm going to be talking about first is sort of the nature of the technology world today, which includes a lot of things. So I'm going to be talking about integrations of people, integrations of technology, and integrations of lots and lots and lots and lots of things. And please get in touch with me. I'll flip back to my Twitter handle there. Really happy to hear your feedback. Plus, if any of you guys have any processes that you use that you would like to share, I'm always sort of interested in what other people are doing, so feel free to get in touch. So a little bit of background also on me. My name's Courtney Hempil. I've been a developer for about 8 years. I sort of geek out on process a little bit though, because I see it's kind of useful. So I'm now a partner and a tech lead at Carbon 5. I work with a variety of our clients, and I was a Ruby full stack developer for really the past 8 or so years. So this is the wall of screens at the Chrome Dev Summit. I mean, as you can imagine, there's just lots and lots of different ways that we can develop these days for lots of different screens. At this point in time, there's really like 18,000 screens sizes in Android. So even though we're looking at that landscape and it's a really overwhelming thought, even this device wall is really going to be obsolete in probably like 6 months to a year. So the reality is that the technology that we're creating these days, it's dynamically changing. How many people here, I'm going to sort of make an assumption here, you guys all have smartphones? Okay, yeah. Devices, who here has got a Fitbit, a Shine, maybe you have a Garmin? Yeah, so couple of you guys. We're going to see more and more of that. This world that we're moving towards, it is a multi-device world. Nests. You know, my cousins in Austin, they have a Nest. I'm like, seriously? So this is something that more and more is a thing that you're going to be developing for, right? And these devices, they're gathering data and they're pinging data. So more and more sort of gathering of data is going to be a thing, as well as us needing to understand that data and what to do with it. The other thing is, there's this idea of channels now. Who here has ever gone into their favorite restaurant and ordered something on a kiosk or into a retail store and used a kiosk to find something in that store or find it online? So these are things. There's different channels now that we're also having to consider, and companies really need to create value across all of these channels. So right now it's really cool if you can sit at your desk, make an appointment with someone, type in an address for that appointment into your Google Calendar, and then pop over to your Tesla and recognize that that appointment with the address is right there and it just is going to direct you straight to your appointment. So that's like, wow, that's so cool right now that that's happening. Really, it's not far away to where that's almost going to be expected, and it's going to be a glaring omission if you are not providing that as a part of the service of your integrated company. So it's sort of intimidating, the future, you know. We've got not just devices and not just different channels, we've got augmented reality. And this is a thing. I mean, there's huge companies that are investing billions of dollars into things like Oculus, things like the HoloLens, right? That thing's been in development for at least 4 years, if not more. And these are things that we as developers need to start thinking about. So it's not just mobile devices anymore. It's things that no longer have a swipe interface or touching. They're going to be voice. 87% of iPhone users have used Siri to activate some mechanism of the app. The other thing is that the cloud is now our capability of pushing more and more stuff more and more quickly into the cloud and then using it, leveraging it from a variety of different places. So these are all sort of new technologies that can make you kind of feel like, oh my God, what am I doing? Like, how do I deal with all of this? So there's multiple input, multiple output. if we can work together and work with designers to really figure out from this very crazy landscape how we can best provide value across all of these different crazy inputs, outputs, devices, channels, we stand to provide value to the end customer. And that's really what at Carbon 5 we're trying to do with our clients is how do we look at all of the different ways in which your customers are currently doing the thing that you want to optimize and figure out how we can best add value and where. So again, this can sort of be overwhelming, but I sort of like to recognize that this has kind of all happened before. Does anyone sort of recognize what this graph is and what that huge spike represents? Anyone? Yeah, so it's like that was the start of the Industrial Revolution. Does anyone know what that little bump is over there? Black Plague. Sort of sucks. So yeah, I mean, we're driving this train. This is getting ever and ever more increasing gross domestic product by technology. And in the Industrial Revolution, we saw the same thing. First Industrial Revolution was really the creation of a lot of innovation. And the second Industrial Revolution was the harnessing of processes, right? This was the assembly line. This was like Ford producing mass production of cars. So, you know, you can sort of relax because this has all happened, but this is happening again, and you're in the middle of it. And I would argue that this is actually also a design revolution. So much like Charles and Ray Eames were able to use new developments in manufacturing to come up with really creative novel concepts for furniture, we have the capability working with design to really push technology to some pretty novel places. And what this is going to require is a lot of different skill sets, right? So we need a lot of different members on our team collaborating closely with one another, because if we're not collaborating closely, our ability to quickly produce stuff and to have the sorts of conversations that are going to allow us to understand the landscape that we're developing for, it's limited. So, you know, in traditional product development, what we thought was the best approach was, let's take the specialist and we'll put them all together, and then that'll optimize their production. Today's world doesn't really work that way anymore. We need to break down the barriers, and we also need to recognize that, frankly, a lot of you people that are developers, you have an eye for design. I mean, moreover, you sort of get a sense of what works and what doesn't, and you know the technology. You're at the forefront of all of this. And frankly, there's designers too that, you know, designers more and more, they're learning to code, they're learning to play around and prototype. So we can stretch across these boundaries now to create a lot more value than we used to. So I want to dive into the details. The learnings that I'm going to talk about and the tools and techniques are across the board useful. So we work with startups, we work with growth companies, we work with enterprise, and it's kind of interesting. All of these projects really benefit from an approach that is what I'm going to describe today. I will not say it's not without challenges. Enterprise always has its own unique swath of challenges, but you know, so does startup and so does growth. So I guess my point is what we see as being necessary is that everyone is together on one team and they're collaborating in a cohesive manner on a continuous basis. So we sort of are a bit persnickety with our clients, and we actually ask that they come on site at Carbon 5. So we have dedicated project rooms and a dedicated team, and they can do all of their work together every day on a continuing basis. And for me, one of the bigger lessons out of this has been that it's actually fine that we have conflict. When you think about sort of the complexity of human knowledge now, you are going to need a diverse mindset in order to solve the really tricky problems that we face today. And there actually has been a lot of research about the ways in which we've optimized for this in the past. One of my favorite stories, it comes from MIT. This was back in the 1940s. This was World War II. And there was a building that they had to build really, really fast because they basically had a bunch of faculty that had nowhere to do their work. So they literally constructed this thing in a matter of months. I think it was like completed in 6 months, which was amazing at the time. And they were like, look, we know it's shoddy. It was actually lined with asbestos. They're like, make do. Just deal with it. We're going to put you all in there. And frankly, it's sort of an incubator. So what ended up happening was you had Noam Chomsky next to the piano repairman, next to the physicist, next to the particle accelerator, and then you had like the model train club down at the basement. And all these people were interacting on a daily basis. It ended up being in existence for over 30 years, and they credit it as having the most innovations of any other building at any other time period at MIT. So they called it the magical incubator. And it was actually said by sort of the father of linguistics that, but for the existence of Building 20, linguistics would not have been developed at all. So it's pretty sort of astounding developments there. Another sort of notable figure that believed in this concept was Steve Jobs. Pixar, originally, the campus was constructed to where they were going to have all of the computer scientists in one building, all of the designers in another building, the artists, and then all of sort of the business people in a completely separate building. And he completely scrapped that plan, and he's like, nope, I want everyone to be interacting as often as possible. He put the mailboxes one central locale, he put the lunchroom and this enormous atrium so that he can ensure that sort of frequent and natural interactions would happen between these different skill sets so that they wouldn't be pigeonholed into one line of thinking. And then, interestingly enough, today, actually, one of the top-tier design schools, Parsons, has a transdisciplinary degree that you can get. So I think there's an understanding in the world that if you can have diverse mindsets in a room working with one another to come up with solutions, you have a better chance of solving really tricky problems. So for us at Carbon 5, what we recognize is that in order to get our teams to understand this, we have to create a cadence for them. So we can really bring it all together and have people moving in a rapid pace towards producing products that have a lot of value in the world. And the things that I'm talking about today, I want to be clear, they're techniques. They're going to work sometimes, they're not going to work others. So use them when they feel like they're lending an advantage to what you're doing, and don't use the ones when they feel like they're just getting in the way. So here are some of the techniques that we use, one of which I talked about in a workshop I gave yesterday. Mapping is sort of a generalized term for something we use a lot. And it's generalized because it's flexible. It's an incredible opportunity to take a bunch of items, a bunch of ideas, and then organize them either in line with the user journey that you're producing, that you're going to be building a product around, or to plan a release, also to run experiments. So mapping is something that I'll walk you guys through that is of a lot of use for us at Carbon 5. And this is an example of one type of map. So this is a user journey. I'll be talking about this client. This is Prosper. They're a peer-to-peer lending platform. And we actually mapped out the user journey as it currently existed. And then we sort of picked it apart. We found questions in each one of the components of the user journey that we needed to ask in order to optimize their conversion. Another thing that we have started to do is that we think of our sprints, and they're week-long sprints, as experiments. And we like to back those with actual analysis and metrics that we can match against that sprint. So coming up with experiments is a little bit tricky, but we have a couple tools that we use to try to align the whole team around that. And then the other thing that we do, and we find that, this is something that we feel like we try to do early on, is to just pay down risk. Oftentimes you get clients that come in and they have pretty crazy ideas. Try to do the riskiest thing first. And this isn't the riskiest thing that your rockstar developer is like, oh, I want to try out this technology. This is the riskiest thing that is going to provide value to the end customer. If you can do this early, then you are going to save yourself a lot of headache at the end. And one way to do this is actually to stand everybody up and go against a wall, and you've got your designers and your developers in the room. You've written up a bunch of features. They get to put those features along the spectrum and say, these are the ones that are going to cost the most amount of time. So those are the ones that are the biggest buck. And then you have your product owner there who's really speaking for the customer. They're saying, I think these have the highest value. And what you're looking to gain here is figuring out what is the biggest bang for your buck. And that is something that the whole team can get around and give all the information necessary to figure out what is the swath of features that you need that you can develop that week. Another question that I get a ton is, and this is really the core of this talk, where does design fit in with a really rapid, agile backlog? We've been lucky, and we've had designers really help us to come up with optimized ways to have design be sort of emergent. So we do just-in-time design. And what that means is oftentimes if you are developing a completely novel new approach to something, it's very hard to understand where that thing is going to go 3 months from there. Particularly with the startup, if you've got a brand that you've done a bunch of research, come up with a brand, and then you actually produce the product and you recognize that customer that we were creating this for, it's actually a little bit different. We went from a B2C play to a B2B play. If you've already done all this upfront work, you might be in complete misalignment now of what the value is of your company. So what we want to ensure is that early on we do the minimum amount of design to make an interface very fluid and easy to understand, but we wait to do sort of the visual language and voice behind a brand until later in the process. Another thing is testable releases. So we really drive this home. We are trying to test every week. Early on, this is going to be what we call lo-fi testing. Maybe it's a clickable prototype. As we progress and create the software week over week, we want to make it more high fidelity, and we bring on sort of more and more customers along the way. So early on, maybe, our customers are, people on the product team, but then every single week we start to reach out more and more broadly. And you have to be sort of careful here. You want to save your very high value customers till kind of the end when things are a little bit more solidified, but you want to continue to test every week because you can find glaring holes in your interface. And, honestly, they're helping you do QA all along the way. So these are a couple of the clients that I'm going to talk about today. One is Bookrunner. So Bookrunner is a company that's trying to make education more affordable, honestly. And they're trying to do it by providing textbooks at a cheaper cost. But what they found was that a lot of their clients, their students, when they were going into the bookstore to try to purchase their books, they would run home and then they would look up the cost on Amazon. And at that point in time, they didn't have the opportunity to actually rent the book, even if it was a cheaper option. They would just hit buy from Amazon. So they wanted to produce an application, an SMS and mobile, for students to be able to see what the comparative pricing was for all of their options, including Bookrunner. So really interesting. We did a lot of testing with them, and it's been really successful. Lightwave is it's honestly just really fun. So this is effectively biometric bracelets that concert goers can wear in a concert, and it provides real-time data to the DJ or performer of what the crowd is doing. So the crowd is basically dancing away, and it's showing the DJ how they're reacting to each song, so the DJ can then actually optimize their play set to the audience. Really fun project for many reasons. Prosper is the one that I mentioned before. So this is peer-to-peer lending. We were brought on to help optimize their conversion funnel to really move up the numbers there. And so we ran weekly tests, really did some interesting stuff around scripting for Optimizely to ensure that we were getting actual metrics that we could measure week over week. And we ended up roughly doubling their conversion rate. So it was a pretty successful project. The other thing is I want to give credit where credit's due. There's a lot of people on these teams, but these are some of the notable folks that worked on these two projects. So if you have particular questions or if you're just sort of like, wow, that's cool, feel free to ping them on Twitter. I know they'd be psyched. All right, so here is a week at a glance at Carbon 5. So this is a flexible schedule. In Mondays, we tend to reflect and define. We're usually doing user testing on Fridays. So Mondays, we are doing retrospectives. We're going over the user tests. And then Tuesday, we start to kind of narrow in. So we've done this divergent thinking on Monday, oftentimes involving design thinking exercises. Tuesday, we're sort of zeroing in on the work that we're going to be doing that week. And then Wednesday and Thursday, we're building it out. Friday is when we bring in users, whether we're bringing them in through Craigslist or whatnot, or even into the office. We are making sure that we've got something to put in front of someone that Friday. So again, I know it sort of is like Monday through Friday. It can be Wednesday to Wednesday. A lot of the time, early on in our kickoff, it's going to look like a stack of Mondays. And then later on in the process, we can minimize the amount of design thinking exercises that we're doing. So this is a flexible schedule. And again, these are techniques you can use. Adapt them to your teams. So again, Monday. This is sort of some of the exercises that you're going to see us do on Monday. First off, retrospectives are the best part of Agile. Not doing these actually causes a lot of pain to the team. So continually doing these things is incredibly important. And this is not just your developers. I know Agile is sort of like, sit down the development team. We have the designers, the product owners, anyone from the client side in talking about what went well last week, what sucked, what we could do better, and putting this up on the board so that everyone can see and we can learn from it. And if you have a distributed team, that's no excuse. We actually have developed an application called Stickies.io. We use this for a ton of different things, but it's a fantastic way to do retrospectives, even if the team isn't co-located. We also actually use it for capturing user feedback. So there's a lot of ways that you can capture user feedback. You can use video, audio. Frankly, those two things rarely get listened to after the fact, but taking notes is incredibly powerful. So if you have team members listening to a user testing session and taking notes, this is something that over the time can be very valuable. And you can also see that there's, 5 people saw this one thing happening. That's obviously of high priority for us to be fixing or looking at. One thing that'll happen after these conversations is people are stoked to do work. They have ideas in their head and they want to get them out. Having a whiteboard available, this is not a designer, this is actually our product owner, and he is immediately jumping up and he's just doing wireframing. Lightweight artifacts in our world make a lot of efficiency. So coming up and having the designer go and do a bunch of wireframing, if you can do it on a whiteboard all together in a room, it takes like 20 minutes. You take an iPhone picture, you attach that to a story. That is your design right there. So keeping things lightweight is something that provides a lot of value in the long run because it's just efficient. So also on Mondays, this is when we're coming up with what are the tests that we want to run. So we sort of are playing around with this notion of TDD, but with the D as design instead of development. We're also doing test-driven development, obviously. But this is sort of an interesting way to keep yourself honest. Figuring out how you can create both qualitative and quantitative analytics to either say that, yes, the thing that we thought was going to happen did happen, and here's why, or no, we were completely wrong, our hypothesis is bunk. This is something that will actually be really tough to sell early on, particularly to clients that just want to build features. But when they start to see needles move, that is huge. So this is something to really try out and to push it for a couple weeks before it's going to get adoption. So how do you find your way to some of these tests? We end up using a lot of 6-up sketching for finding tests. So some of the user testing sessions come up with learnings that we then are like, well, how do we solve that? Having the whole team do 6-ups, which is effectively a way to come up with 6 ideas very quickly of an approach that you can take. You then can share those ideas amongst the group, figure out the one that is most testable or that seems like it has the most legs, and then you put that in the queue to move forward with. Another thing, and this was a real key thing with Lightwave, is don't always think that the data that you're getting is the data that you're getting. Test out your devices, test out your data, figure out an interface that you believe is going to be utilizing the data in the way that you think you're receiving it, and then perhaps you're getting a couple holes. I don't know if you guys can see this, but we have a lot of holes in this data. So we had to figure out why, and that was really important to do early on. So Tuesday, this is where we start to define. Frankly, a lot of these exercises, as the cadence of the project starts to get up to speed, this will happen on a Monday, right in line with the retrospective and user testing analysis. But this is where you sort of want to have the team stand up. How are we going to solve this thing? A lot more whiteboard wireframing. In this scenario, we were actually sort of considering space design versus API design. And these are where you need the product owner in the room. You need to ask them really hard questions like, are we going to use Wi-Fi or do we have to set up our own LAN environment? These are really important product decisions that only they can make. This additionally is a great opportunity to really showcase the plan of action for the week. So something that we saw as, again, getting buy-in for the testing that we wanted to do, we needed to really visualize the hypothesis and the plan of action that we were going to take so that the client felt like, okay, I get it. There's a plan behind this. I understand what's going to happen. And on Friday, I'm going to actually see a result. So the other thing is you're going to come up with lots of different testing you can run. This is sort of like a Kanban board for potential tests. So there's ones that are in production. These are ones that are actually coming back with lots and lots of qualitative analytics. There are ones that are in development. We're going to have a lower level of quantitative analytics, but we get a lot of qualitative from those. And then there's the ones that are in the queue. And then down at the bottom there's the ones that, no dice, they didn't work. So really interesting to be able to see what's coming up, what we're currently working on, and what's in production. It helps clarify a lot. And then another thing is, story writing is really important. So we've tried really hard to be disciplined about BDD story writing. This is helpful for the client early on to educate them about why it's important to be thinking about stories from the framework of value to the end user. It also helps for the whole team to sort of get behind this idea that the thing that you're developing is not just a feature, it's a feature that ideally will be used by someone, and how are we going to measure that? So being really disciplined about story writing is something that we find is really important. And then the other thing to bring up, because it's a mobile conference and we're talking about devices, is that testing on devices is actually really hard. Early on, prototyping is fine. We use a couple different products. I've listed a couple here. As you move forward in a product, you really need to start testing on the actual devices. I mean, we found glaring errors in our UI just because somebody's thumb was over something. So as you move forward with the product, make sure that you have real devices. And frankly, if they're on a wall and you're just looking at them, it's different than holding it and moving it around. And then the other thing I would say is what we've done is start to figure out how we can sort of script against our analytics. So on mobile, there's a lot of advantages to be had if you've already deployed this thing to the App Store to figure out sort of like back-end scripting ways that you can run testing, A/B script testing. So we did a lot of iterations on that, how we could use that with Optimizely. And then the way that our Agile backlog is integrated with design and testing is that we have releases, and each release has a bunch of stories. Each individual story has a link to the designs, and then at the end of it all, we have the metrics that we're expecting to get at the end of the day. So that is something that allows us to really both not just accept and reject stories, but to accept and reject this test that we ran. So really sort of an interesting way having releases tethered to a test run. So finally, Wednesday and Thursday, this is the fun part. This is when we get to code. We're also doing sort of really quick prototypes to start to display some of this information. This is specifically for Lightwave, to be like, for the product owner, is the data that we're getting in the data that you want to see? Does this actually indicate that, a bunch of people dancing in a room is really of the emotion level that you expect? And then additionally, you've had conversations that now allow the team to be at a comfort level with one another, where the developers can run and grab a designer, jump up to a whiteboard, and figure out what the problem is that they're currently having without feeling like they have to send out an email or something along those lines. So really powerful to sort of have those early conversations. And then we like to create sort of a living style guide or a kit of parts. Oftentimes, developers don't want to feel like they're blocked by design. If you give them a font set of icons, they can do their first best shot at an interface, and then they get to grab the designer. You get to sit down, do some pair programming. The design gets to be pixel perfect, the white space is adjusted, headlines across the border in the right size, and that gets pushed right into the code. So there's no sort of like measuring in Photoshop anymore. It's checked straight into Git. And then finally, story acceptance. There is a huge psychological benefit, if any of you guys are the product side of things, to accepting stories. Having the team know that you are critically looking at the work that they're doing and you're accepting it or rejecting it. Rejection, honestly, is great because you know that someone has looked at the thing that you've done. So there's a huge benefit. Make sure that story accepting ideally is happening on a rolling fashion. And if not, do it in a demo with the product owner when they're in the room. So then Friday. So this is the fun part. This is the analysis. So usually we're pushing code straight up to where we do the user test, but we have a moment in time where we're like, okay, no more pushes. We're now going to run our user tests. The way in which we run user tests, there's two types, right? I've talked a little bit about the quantitative side of things. That is something that code just gets pushed out and you've got your test all ready to run and you just get to see the numbers come in. But when you're doing qualitative testing with users, you need to have a plan. And there really is an approach here that is better than others. If you are sort of guiding your user, you're like, hey, wouldn't you use this amazing app? Of course they're going to say yes. So you want to try to decouple your opinion of the thing that you're testing them with as much as possible. And I would also say, if you're looking to go broad or specific, have a narrative that really backs what you're trying to learn from your user. So for an example, Book Runner, we would actually do 5 on Friday. So we would bring 5 users in. We would send out a Craigslist post. We'd be like, $30 Starbucks or Amazon gift certificate, and we'd get 5 students, and they would come into the Book Runner office, and we actually set up store tags so we could have them walk around a physical store with their native phone, whether it was an SMS smartphone, or sorry, whether or not it was a smartphone or sort of an SMS version. And we tried to figure out how they were interacting. We learned a lot really quickly. And the thing that we also learned was that it was very easy on Book Runner for us to bring in students. I've worked on projects where it's like, you're aligning towards top tier doctors at Stanford. You're not going to get 5 of those guys in on a Friday. It just isn't going to happen. So oftentimes what we'll also do is this notion of kind of hybrid prototyping. If you can get a very hard to get user into your office to do testing, try to get as much testing out of them as you can. So oftentimes once they've played around with a very animated dynamic interface, you can take the same iconography, throw it up on a whiteboard, and start asking them different questions. You can even give them the marker and be like, what would you prefer to have seen happen right there? So this was a really sort of powerful way for us to actually prototype real time. The other, and I'm totally joking here, this isn't real-time prototyping and I would never recommend this, but we did recognize, so for the first test of Lightwave, it was a big concert venue in Singapore with Paul Oakenfold playing for over an hour, and it was real-time live streamed throughout the world. We wanted to make sure that if something happened, we sort of had a backdoor to try to fix it. So we had a way to actually send a file, get it uploaded to the server, and I'll try to play a little bit of this if it's going to play. I don't think the sound's going. So this is our spiritual gangster, Paul Oakenfold. So what was happening here was they had different screens, or sorry, different cameras around the venue that were capturing the crowd, the DJ booth. What he has up at the front was an interface that we built that allowed him to see the energy level, sort of the male-female split of the dancing that was happening. And then sort of other analysis of their biometrics. And so he could kind of adjust the level of music he was playing or the different songs that he was playing. And then the audience actually also had a big display, so they could see there was like a leaderboard for the most active dancer. And then we had this big cloud. So it was actually really fun. And afterwards, each one of the people that signed up and actually used the Lightwave, they got an email with their performance over the night. So they got to see which songs they danced the hardest to and how they stacked up against the guys and all these sort of fun metrics. So it was a fun project, obviously. And they're now kind of deploying this to a ton of places all over the place. And they should probably be at South by Southwest, so you should go check them out. So finally, there is a lot of discipline that's required in taking this approach. And we work with clients and they push back constantly. They're like, can't we just push out features? Like, do I really have to talk to you every day? You do. This is the way in which we have found it is the most efficient, most productive, most valuable manner of developing software. And then the other thing is that it is absolutely fine to have conflict. Conflict is really good in our world. Conflict is the thing that allows innovation to happen. So let it arise, but make sure that you have a way to productively capture and move forward on it. So for us, sort of these are the foundations of the way that we work. Lots and lots of conversations. This is backed by story writing, milestone planning, mapping, acceptance. Another thing is that, our culture, we really laud the cross-functional, cross-disciplinary teams. It's something that I personally believe is really important. And frankly, it creates a lot more fun. Teams really enjoy working this way. And then the cadence. Keeping yourself on a routine weekly, having the constraint of time is amazing in moving things forward really fast. So I've included a couple of resources and references. I'll put this slide deck up on SlideShare and tweet it out. And that's what I've got. I think we've got about 10 minutes for questions.
Yeah, great. The first question is from me. Is it working? Yeah, okay. The first question is from me. You seems the Agile approach of the design UX is quite fit with your company. It's tightly aligned and loosely decoupled teams that have the business perspective from the client.
Yep.
So how you get this point?
So it's a great question because we have the ability, and actually this was said by someone else earlier this morning, our company is still relatively small in comparison. So we have the opportunity to recognize early on if it's just a bad fit with a client that's like, we're not going to be able to be around every week, we're going to be off doing other things. We just recognize that that's a bad fit for the style of development that we do. So we are able to sort of pick the clients that we can have come and be a part of our teams. And it is because we are a little bit smaller and we don't have to kind of flex as much. Having said that, though, we do recognize that there's an opportunity to really educate people. And so for a lot of the clients, in conversations with them and actually in, putting them through workshops and stuff, they start to see that there actually is a lot of value in producing a product owner that can be available to the team real time, at a minimum, 3 days a week and for the 15-minute stand-up every day.
Okay, great. Do anybody has a question? There's one person. Go. Aha, już proszę.
With the Monday, Tuesday, and Friday, so like the design iterations and user testing, is the whole team involved in that, or every developer is involved in that, or do they use that time to look at bugs or something else?
It's the question I always get, and I should probably be more descriptive in my talk. So the way that it works is early on, we have what we call iteration 0. And iteration 0 is when the team first gets together. That's the whole team for usually around 1 to 2 days, working together, learning from the client, the domain space, running design thinking exercises together, and frankly getting to know one another. At that point in time, there absolutely is a split where development will start to put in kind of infrastructural elements in their coding, and design will start to do their thing. So design leads the development teams usually about 1 to 2 weeks in advance, and so they are doing things separate from the development team. What we try to do best, though, is to ensure that there's check-in points, and those check-in points are at the minimum, Monday during the reflection, user testing, and really planning out for the week. There's stand-ups every day with the entire team. And then on Friday, it's amazingly advantageous to have members of the team involved in user testing, because there's sort of this psychological, when you see someone use a failing application, you're like, I'm going to go fix that bug right now. So we make sure that there's touch points all the time, but there's definitely, obviously, the developers are going to be doing coding and the designers are going to be designed separately.
Great. Next question.
Hey, I'm in a quite similar situation with my work. How do you deal with crazy wishes from your customers? So often we try to invite them and we try to work with them also in teams, like probably you do. Yep. But often our clients come in and say, oh, and yesterday I had this idea and we have to implement that, and here another idea. And that's really from every second or third day we get some crazy ideas and we should do them, and we're not in the position to say always no. Yep. Because
the utopian answer is like, well, you just see the ones that are saying often and then you fix those first. But reality dictates, and this is something for startups that's really difficult, you are going to have to figure out what features both are valuable to the most customers, but frankly also to the most important customers early on. And oftentimes those important customers are investors. So we absolutely understand, and we have to work with our clients to figure out what are the features that matter the most, and then really run that against kind of the importance of those customers. So priority is a tricky game to play, but you have to kind of be honest with yourself about it. And one thing that we have found to be pretty valuable when you're interviewing hundreds of customers is two things. One, you can use, I don't know if anyone's familiar with Tomer Sharon's Rainbow spreadsheet. It's a way in which people that are listening to different user interviews can kind of mark their observations about what's necessary. And as you're getting customer feedback, you can mark the things that you hear, and you'll see patterns evolve. And obviously, the patterns that you see that are the biggest sort of amalgamation of customers that are saying that thing, those are the ones you want to focus on.
Okay, the next question.
How do you get designers and developers to work together in a more constructive way? I mean, what I've seen a lot is design teams working on some feature for 2 months, and then they just hand Photoshop files to developers, and then nothing works, and everything has to be designed again and developed again. And it's a problem that we found really hard to fix.
Yeah, this is something, I mean, it's a culture that we're used to, right? This is how software development has happened for eons. Yeah, you invite them to the table with the developers. That's the biggest. And then the other thing that we have found, and this is probably the biggest one, there's actually sort of this inherent mistrust of the two groups of one another. So the only way that you can handle mistrust amongst group is to kind of like smash them together. And when I say smash, you try to do that in a non-combative way. But pair programming is also pair design developers, having them sit together and having the designers recognize that the developers actually do want to create this beautiful interface, and that they understand, having the designer there and going screen by screen through to get it pixel perfect, get the white space adjusted. Early on, the developers will kind of bristle because they'll be like, really, is this really important? But they'll start to recognize that working with the designers, you get that kind of conversation that progresses it forward. And then the developers benefit because they don't have to do a lot of like digging through documents to get the pixel perfect, and then hearing the designers be like, oh, all of those headlines are the wrong font. So that is, pairing them together is a really great thing. And then the last thing I will say about that is having a way in which designs can be versioned and accessible by developers cuts down on a lot of sort of the back and forth that happens. So we attach designs to our stories, and we use things like Red Pen, or we've actually used GitHub to version the Photoshop comps that they're getting.
Okay, the next question.
Thank you very much for your talk. I have one question. So I just want to ensure whether designers and engineers always start at the same time, because we often encounter a situation when actually there is not enough work for engineers until designers provide them with some initial design, or even some, engineers needs much more information to be able to start.
Yeah,
how do you approach it?
This is a good one. It's not a unilateral approach. What we do is we look at the technology requirements. If there's heavy lifting to be done on the tech side, we can start the team at the same time. If we recognize that, honestly, there's like more sort of to be vetted from the design perspective, we would ramp up design earlier on and then roll in the developers later on. And that does sort of, from a consultancy standpoint, it creates this like Tetris game of resourcing, but it is to, yeah, exactly. So you get this, usually the gap is nowhere more than 2 weeks. And for us, usually it's a week. So we always kick off the project with the entire team. And that's usually like a 2-day period. And then we can have either developers roll off, or if they can start working on sort of a technical spike. If they can't work on a technical spike and we really need to have them wait, then they'll roll off for 2 weeks and then roll back on.
Okay, and we have a room for one more question.
What's the ratio between developers and designers at Carbon 5? How many?
Let's see, we have about 42 developers and we have 7 designers.
Okay, thank you very much. That concludes your talk.
Thanks,
Thank you
everyone.
very much. It was great talk.
If anyone has questions or if anyone wants a Carbon 5 sticker,
Yeah.